Have you ever wondered, in those quiet moments when grief overwhelms your heart, whether your departed loved ones can still see you, know your struggles, and feel your tears? This question has haunted humanity since the first soul left this earth, but few know that the Catholic Church holds profound teachings about this mystery, teachings that can transform your understanding of death itself. You are about to discover what actually happens when a soul crosses the threshold of eternity, and more importantly, what they perceive about those they've left behind in this valley of tears. The night your mother passed away, you might have felt an unbearable emptiness, as if a vital part of your own soul had been torn away. But what if you discovered that at that very moment, while you wept beside her still form, she was experiencing something entirely different? Not an ending, but a beginning. Not separation, but a new form of presence that transcends physical boundaries. The Church teaches that death does not sever the bonds of love. Rather, it purifies and elevates them to a supernatural dimension where souls participate in God's own knowledge. Saint Teresa of Avila, that great mystic who penetrated the deepest mysteries of the spiritual life, wrote extensively about the communion that exists between heaven and earth. In her visions, she saw how the saints in heaven maintain an active interest in the spiritual welfare of their loved ones, not through human curiosity, but through their participation in God's own love for each soul. She understood that the separation we feel so acutely is only from our limited perspective. From the other side, there is no separation at all, only a different mode of presence, more real and more powerful than we can imagine. Consider this truth that few fully grasp. When you pray, when you struggle, when you fall and rise again, you are not doing so in isolation. The Catechism teaches that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, and this is not metaphorical language. It is a spiritual reality more solid than the ground beneath your feet. Your deceased father, your grandmother, that friend who left too soon, if they are with God, they see you through His eyes, know your needs through His knowledge, and love you with a love that has been perfected in the divine flame. You might think that heaven is a distant place, separated from earth by an insurmountable chasm, but the doctrine of the communion of saints reveals something extraordinary. There is no distance in the spiritual realm, only different states of being united in one mystical body. When St. Thomas Aquinas contemplated this mystery, he understood that the blessed in heaven see all things in God insofar as it is useful to them, meaning they have knowledge of earthly affairs according to God's will and for the good of souls. This isn't abstract theology. It's about your mother knowing when you need her prayers most, your father seeing your children grow, your grandparents witnessing your acts of faith. Subscribe to receive more profound teachings about the mysteries of faith and the afterlife. Picture for a moment what happens when you light a candle for your deceased spouse, when you whisper their name in prayer, when you offer Mass for their soul. That gesture doesn't disappear into a void. It reaches them like a beam of light piercing through dimensions, bringing them joy, consolation, and if they are in purgatory, actual relief from their purification. The mystics tell us that souls in purgatory are acutely aware of who prays for them, who remembers them, who offers sacrifices on their behalf. Saint Catherine of Genoa, who received extraordinary revelations about purgatory, confirmed that these souls know their benefactors by name. But here's what will truly move your heart. The souls of your loved ones don't merely receive your prayers passively. According to the testimony of countless saints and mystics, they become your advocates before God's throne, interceding for you with a power and fervor that surpasses their earthly capabilities. That grandmother who always worried about your salvation, her concern hasn't diminished. It has been transformed into perfect prayer, united with Christ's own intercession. That parent who couldn't quite express their love in life, they now love you with a portion of God's own infinite love, seeing you as He sees you, understanding you as He understands you. When Saint Faustina Kowalska wrote in her diary about her encounters with souls from purgatory, she revealed something remarkable. These souls expressed profound gratitude for prayers offered on their behalf and promised to repay this charity when they reached heaven. One soul told her, "Your prayer has shortened my time in purgatory, and now I will pray for you." This isn't merely a pious story. It's a glimpse into the economy of grace that operates between the three states of the Church: militant, suffering, and triumphant. You are not alone in your struggles. You have advocates who know you intimately and who work tirelessly for your eternal welfare. Have you ever stood at a graveside and wondered whether the soul you're mourning can see your tears, feel your love, know your regrets? The Church's mystical tradition provides answers that might surprise you with their specificity and comfort. The saints in heaven, united with the beatific vision, see earthly events not through their own limited perception, but through God's infinite knowledge. They see what He permits them to see, and invariably this includes everything that pertains to the salvation and consolation of their loved ones. Your mother in heaven doesn't watch you like someone peering through a window. She knows you in God, sees you in His light, understands you through His wisdom. Consider what this means for your daily life. Every act of virtue you perform, every prayer you whisper, every sacrifice you make is witnessed not only by God, but by those who loved you on earth and now love you more perfectly in heaven. That father who seemed distant in life, perhaps struggling with his own demons and limitations, now sees clearly the love you bore him despite everything. He understands your childhood tears, your adolescent anger, your adult forgiveness. More than that, He actively participates in your spiritual journey, adding His prayers to yours, His merits to your efforts, His perfected love to your imperfect attempts at holiness. Saint Teresa understood this intimate connection between heaven and earth through her numerous mystical experiences. She wrote that God sometimes permitted her to know that souls she had known in life were praying for her from heaven, that they felt joy when she advanced in virtue and sorrow when she fell into imperfection. But their sorrow was not like earthly sadness. It was a holy desire for her perfection, free from anxiety or despair, because they see all things in the light of God's ultimate victory. This is why you sometimes feel an inexplicable peace after praying to a deceased loved one, why you sense their presence during significant moments, why certain decisions seem guided by an invisible hand that feels familiar. Write in the comments, "My loved ones in heaven see me through God's eyes," and subscribe to deepen your understanding of these mysteries. The souls in purgatory exist in a state that most of us can barely comprehend, saved yet suffering, assured of heaven yet temporarily separated from the beatific vision. But what do they know of us, their loved ones still struggling in this valley of tears? Saint Catherine of Genoa, who received perhaps the most detailed revelations about purgatory, tells us something profound. These souls possess a dual awareness. They know their own state perfectly, and they have knowledge of those who remember them on earth. When you offer a mass for your deceased aunt, she knows it. When you perform an act of charity in your grandfather's name, he receives the benefit. When you simply whisper, "I miss you," to your departed spouse, that message reaches them in ways that transcend our understanding. You might wonder how souls undergoing purification can be aware of earthly events when they are consumed with their own spiritual refinement. The answer lies in the nature of purgatory itself. It is not a place cut off from the communion of saints, but an integral part of it. These souls remain members of Christ's mystical body, connected to us through bonds of grace that suffering cannot sever. In fact, their suffering increases their sensitivity to spiritual realities, making them acutely aware of the prayers and sacrifices offered on their behalf. They feel the relief of each Mass, the consolation of each rosary, the power of each indulgence applied to their state. But here's what will move you deeply. These souls don't just passively receive our help, they actively reciprocate with their own prayers for us. Though they cannot merit for themselves, they can intercede for others, and they do so with an intensity born of gratitude and love. Saint Teresa learned through divine revelation that souls in purgatory often pray more fervently for their benefactors than they ever did on earth because they now understand the true value of prayer and the reality of spiritual warfare. That mother you pray for daily, she's fighting for your salvation from purgatory with a warrior's determination. That friend whose death left you broken, he's working for your healing with a love purified by holy fire. The testimonies of mystics consistently reveal that souls in purgatory are particularly powerful intercessors for certain intentions. For the conversion of sinners, because they understand the horror of sin. For those suffering depression or despair, because they know the value of hope. For those facing death, because they've crossed that threshold. And especially for other souls in purgatory, because they understand that suffering. When you feel overwhelmed by life's burdens, Remember that you have an army of advocates in purgatory who understand suffering intimately and who repay your prayers with their own powerful intercession. Every time you kneel to pray for your deceased loved ones, you're not performing a solitary act of remembrance. You're activating a supernatural communication system that bridges heaven, earth, and purgatory. This isn't wishful thinking or mere consolation for the grieving. It's a theological reality confirmed by 2 millennia of church teaching and mystical experience. When you whisper your father's name in prayer, that name resonates in eternity. When you offer your suffering for your grandmother's soul, that offering becomes a currency of grace in the spiritual economy. When you have a mass celebrated for your spouse, that mass opens channels of grace that flow in both directions. You see, prayer for the dead is not a one-way street where we blindly send help into the unknown. Saint Teresa discovered through her mystical experiences that it creates a reciprocal relationship of love and assistance. She wrote about instances where she prayed for deceased sisters and later experienced their presence during her own trials, feeling their support and intercession in tangible ways. One night, while struggling with a particularly difficult spiritual darkness, she felt the distinct presence of a recently deceased nun whom she had helped through prayer. And this presence brought her such consolation that her trial became bearable. This is the mystery of the communion of saints. We help them, and they help us in an endless circulation of charity. Consider how this changes everything about death and separation. That unbearable grief you feel when someone dies, it's real and valid, but it's not the whole story. While you mourn the physical absence, a new form of relationship is being established, one that operates according to different laws, the laws of grace rather than nature. Your prayers become a lifeline, not just for them, but for you. Every mass you offer, every rosary you pray, every act of charity you perform in their name strengthens this supernatural bond. You're not just remembering them, you're actively participating in their journey toward God and allowing them to participate in yours. The Church has always understood this, which is why the practice of praying for the dead extends back to the earliest Christian communities. The catacombs are filled with inscriptions asking for prayers, showing that the first Christians knew what we sometimes forget. Death changes the mode of relationship but doesn't end it. Your loved ones haven't abandoned you. They've simply moved to a different position in the great symphony of salvation. They now see reality from God's perspective, understanding things that were hidden from them in life, including the true depth of your love, the sincerity of your struggles, and the beauty of your soul beneath all its imperfections. How many times have you felt an inexplicable peace while visiting a grave, sensed a familiar presence during prayer, or experienced a sudden resolution to a problem after asking for your deceased loved one's intercession? These experiences, far from being mere psychological phenomena, often represent authentic moments of contact between the worlds. Saint Teresa, with her extraordinary gift for discerning spiritual realities, taught that God sometimes permits souls to manifest their presence to comfort the living, guide them in difficult decisions, or simply assure them of their continued love. These manifestations aren't ghostly hauntings, but graces permitted by God for the good of souls. You must understand that the blessed and the souls in purgatory don't operate independently of God's will. Every interaction, every sign, every moment of felt presence occurs within His providence. When your deceased mother seems to answer your desperate prayer with a sign you can't explain, when your grandfather's favorite hymn plays at exactly the moment you need encouragement, when you dream of your departed friend and wake with inexplicable peace, these aren't coincidences or wishful thinking. The Church, while always counseling discernment, acknowledges that God can and does permit such consolations, especially for those who are grieving or facing trials. But here's what Saint Teresa wants you to know. You don't need extraordinary signs to be assured of your loved one's continued presence and care. The ordinary workings of grace, the strength to forgive, the courage to persevere, the peace that surpasses understanding, often come through their intercession. That moment when you're about to fall into serious sin and something holds you back, that might be your praying grandmother's intercession, that unexpected opportunity that changes your life. Perhaps your Father in heaven has been storming heaven's gates on your behalf. The protection your children experience, the healing of family relationships, the gradual conversion of hardened hearts. Behind all these graces may stand your loved ones, working with God's grace for your good. The key is to develop what Saint Teresa called spiritual sensitivity, an awareness of the spiritual realities that surround and interpenetrate our material existence. This doesn't mean becoming superstitious or seeing signs everywhere, but rather living with the conscious awareness that you're part of a vast community that transcends death. Your loved ones haven't disappeared, they've been transformed. They don't love you less, they love you more perfectly. They're not absent, they're present in a new way. Learning to recognize and appreciate this presence, even when it's subtle, can transform your experience of loss into an experience of expanded communion. What if you discovered that your deceased loved ones have been assigned a sacred mission regarding your eternal salvation? This isn't fantasy, but a truth deeply embedded in Catholic mystical theology. The souls in heaven and those being purified in purgatory maintain an active interest in the salvation of those they loved on earth. And this interest isn't mere sentiment, it's a participation in God's own salvific will for every soul. Your grandmother, who prayed the rosary daily, hasn't stopped praying for you. She now prays with perfect knowledge of your needs. Your father, who worried about your future, now sees that future in God's eternal present and works for your ultimate good. Saint Teresa understood through her visions that souls in the afterlife often have specific missions regarding their loved ones. Some are particularly charged with protecting family members from spiritual dangers, others with inspiring vocations, still others with healing family wounds that persist through generations. She wrote about a deceased priest who appeared to her, thanking her for her prayers that freed him from purgatory and revealing that he would now dedicate his heavenly intercession to her reform of the Carmelite order. If souls take on such missions for those they knew only spiritually, how much more for their own flesh and blood, their spouses, their children, their dearest friends? You carry wounds, perhaps, from relationships that ended badly, from words left unsaid, from forgiveness never sought or given. But death has given your loved ones a new perspective. They now see with God's eyes, understand with His wisdom, love with His love. That father who was harsh and demanding, he now understands the wounds that drove his behavior and longs for your healing. That sibling with whom you feuded, they now see the triviality of your conflicts and work for reconciliation. That spouse who died with things unresolved, they now comprehend everything perfectly and desire nothing more than your peace and salvation. The purgatorial fire that purifies them also purifies their love for you, burning away all selfishness, all limitation, leaving only pure charity. This mission of the holy souls extends beyond individual relationships to family healing across generations. Saint Teresa learned that souls often work to break destructive patterns that have plagued families for generations, cycles of addiction, abuse, unforgiveness, or spiritual blindness. When you pray for your ancestors, even those you never knew, you activate this healing power. They, in turn, work from their position in eternity to heal wounds you might not even know you carry. This is why many people experience profound healing and liberation after having masses offered for their entire family lineage. They're not just helping the dead, they're allowing the dead to help them break free from generational bondages. When you suffer, whether from illness, loss, betrayal, or any of life's countless trials, you probably don't realize that your departed loved ones are intimately aware of your pain and are working to transform it into grace. Saint Teresa discovered through her mystical experiences that souls in heaven and purgatory have a profound understanding of suffering's redemptive value, an understanding they desperately wish to communicate to those still in the earthly battle. They see what we cannot, how every tear can become a pearl of great price, how every cross embraced unites us to Christ's passion, how every suffering offered up becomes a powerful force for salvation. Your mother who died of cancer? She now understands perfectly why God permitted her suffering and how it contributed to the salvation of souls, perhaps especially yours. She sees how her patient endurance planted seeds of faith, how her offered pain obtained graces you're only now receiving, how her death itself became a doorway to greater life for many. And now, from her place in eternity, she yearns for you to understand that your own sufferings are not meaningless torments, but potential treasures. When you're crushed by grief, she whispers to your soul, offer it up. When you're overwhelmed by trials, she intercedes for you to receive the grace to see their hidden value. The souls in purgatory have an even more acute understanding of suffering's power because they're experiencing its purifying fire firsthand. But here's what St. Teresa wants you to understand. They rejoice in their suffering because they see its purpose and its end. They would not trade their purifying fire for earthly comfort because they know it's burning away everything that separates them from God. And they want you to know that your earthly sufferings, when united to Christ's passion, can accomplish the same purification here and now, saving you from longer purgation after death. Every headache offered up, every disappointment embraced, every humiliation accepted with grace, these become powerful instruments of sanctification. This is why you sometimes feel an inexplicable strength in the midst of trials, a peace that makes no earthly sense, a joy that coexists with sorrow. Your loved ones are interceding for you to receive these graces, teaching you from beyond the veil what they perhaps never understood in life. That suffering is not God's punishment, but His strange mercy, not His abandonment, but His intimate presence, not meaningless pain, but the birth pangs of glory. They're cheering you on from their place in eternity, begging God to give you the grace to see what they now see clearly, that every cross is a hidden crown, every trial a disguised triumph, every death a doorway to resurrection. As you contemplate these truths about what souls see from the afterlife, you must also consider your own inevitable transition from this world to the next. Saint Teresa, who experienced mystical deaths and returns, understood that how we live determines not only where we spend eternity, but also our capacity to help our loved ones after death. Are you living in such a way that, when your time comes, you'll be able to be a powerful intercessor for those you leave behind? Are you storing up merits that will benefit your family for generations? Are you preparing yourself to see God face to face and in Him, to see and love your dear ones with perfect love? The thought of death might fill you with fear, but understanding the continuity of love and relationship beyond the grave should transform that fear into holy anticipation. You're not heading toward an ending, but toward a transformation, not toward separation, but toward a deeper communion with all whom you've loved. Every prayer you pray now, every Mass you attend, every act of charity you perform is preparing you for your role in the communion of saints. Your deceased loved ones are waiting to welcome you, to show you the realities they now understand, to introduce you to the fullness of life you've only glimpsed in your highest spiritual moments. But here's what Saint Teresa urgently wants you to understand. The time for preparation is now, while you still have the gift of earthly life. Every moment is precious because every moment offers the opportunity to grow in grace, to deepen in love, to store up treasures in heaven. Your loved ones who have gone before you see clearly what perhaps you don't, that earthly life is astoundingly brief, that material concerns are ultimately insignificant, that only love and grace endure. They long for you to understand this now, to live with eternity in view, to make choices that will echo in heaven. They see you wasting time on trivial pursuits, energy on meaningless conflicts, love on passing things, and they yearn to shake you awake to what truly matters. Consider this sobering but liberating truth. One day, you will see your entire earthly life from heaven's perspective. You'll understand every event, every relationship, every joy and sorrow in the light of God's providence. You'll see how your loved ones were working behind the scenes, how their prayers influenced events, how their intercession protected you from dangers you never knew existed. But you'll also see the opportunities missed, the graces rejected, the love withheld. This isn't meant to frighten you, but to motivate you. There's still time to live fully, to love completely, to prepare thoroughly for your eternal mission. Your loved ones are cheering you on, praying for your perseverance, waiting to celebrate your arrival in the place where separation ends and communion is perfect. Imagine, if you can, the moment of your own death, not with fear, but with the eyes of faith. As your earthly vision dims, another sight opens, and there they are, all whom you've loved and lost, but now found again, not as you remember them, but glorified, perfected, radiant with the light of God's presence. Your mother, young again but wise with eternal wisdom. Your father, strong again but gentle with divine love. Children who died too soon, now complete in their celestial maturity. Friends whose absence left you broken, now whole and waiting to embrace you. This isn't a fairy tale, but the promise of Christ Himself, the testimony of saints, the hope that sustains the Church through every persecution and trial. But the reunion Saint Teresa describes goes beyond mere recognition and embrace. She understood through her mystical experiences that the relationships we form on earth, when purified and perfected, become part of heaven's joy. The particular love you bore for specific individuals doesn't disappear in some generic celestial bliss. It's elevated, transformed, made perfect, but still particular. You will know and be known, love and be loved, with all the intensity and intimacy of earthly affection, but none of its limitations or imperfections. The communion you longed for but could never quite achieve on earth becomes fully realized, every barrier removed, every misunderstanding healed, every love brought to its perfect fulfillment. Consider what your loved ones want you to know as they wait for this reunion. They want you to live without fear, to trust in God's mercy, to believe in the power of grace to transform everything. They see your struggles with sin and they don't judge. They intercede. They see your doubts and fears and they don't condemn. They petition heaven for your peace. They see your loneliness and grief and they don't abandon you. They draw closer in prayer. Every tear you shed for them is precious in their sight. Every prayer you offer strengthens the bond. Every act of love you perform in their memory adds to the joy of eventual reunion. They're not watching you with critical eyes, but with hearts full of compassion and hope. The day will come, and from heaven's perspective, it's already here, when the veil drops permanently, when faith becomes vision, when hope becomes possession, when love becomes perfect union. All the pain of separation, all the grief of loss, all the incompleteness of earthly relationships will be swallowed up in a joy so intense that, as Scripture says, the former things will not even be remembered. But until that day, you have work to do, love to give, grace to receive. Your loved ones are your partners in this work, your companions on this journey, your advocates in the spiritual battle. Death has not separated you from them. It has simply changed the mode of your relationship from physical to spiritual, from imperfect to perfect, from temporal to eternal. Live then with the conscious awareness of their presence, their prayers, their love. Let this knowledge transform your grief into hope, your fear into courage, your isolation into communion. The communion of saints is not a doctrine to be believed, but a reality to be lived, and your loved ones are waiting